Hey moms, it's Laura Ollinger. Welcome to the Positively Healthy Mom podcast. Because there's no manual for the hardest job in the world.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, Positively Healthy Moms. Today, I have Logan Hufford. I'm so excited to introduce you to this man who I've just gotten to know because he has an incredibly powerful story of evolution and change and strength and resilience to share with us today. He's the father of 4 children and has a wonderful wife. And so, Logan, can you share why you're here today?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on, Laura. I am here to shout from the rooftops because, having 4 boys, being married to my wife, Carrie, like we have a totally not perfect life, but it's a beautiful one. And yet nothing, it's not an exaggeration to say that none of what you just described, none of this life that I have here should still exist. For years, I did just about everything I could to break it apart. In addiction and just completely destructive cycles, and completely felt trapped in that. And so the last 8+ years have been a journey of recovery out of that. And right now I'm just trying to bring awareness to the fact that healing is available. There's a way out of that cave of addiction and destructive cycles and patterns.
Mm-hmm. And so could you share a little bit more about the addiction? When did it start? Tell us what happened, whatever you're willing to share.
Yeah. I'll definitely, I'll try to give like the 30 or maybe 50,000 foot view, right? And let you zoom in where you want. So I'm just about to turn 34. Been married for 13 years. When I said I do, June 4th, 2011, and married Carrie, I was 20, she was 21. I'd already cheated on her multiple times, with physical interactions with multiple women. We got married. We had our first boy, Elijah, 11 months later. By that time, I'd already cheated on her a couple more times. That only continued for several more years, up through 2015. And it was just this complete hell on earth for my wife, for my family, for myself. And the thing is, if you knew us as a family, if you knew us as a couple, if you were almost anyone except for Carrie, you would have had no clue that any of this was going on. It was this absolute double life, and filled with self-hatred, filled with despair. I always hated that I was doing these things. I knew that it was wrong. I never thought for a second that it was okay. And I know I didn't start at the start, but so going back a bit, so all through my teen years, especially as I was an older teen, without even realizing what I was doing, I was training myself to chase after new and different through pornography, through flirting, seeking attention, and just relying in so many ways on those. I had no idea. I didn't even know what dopamine was, but like those dopamine hits, those highs of getting a text back from a girl, getting a girl to break her plans to come hang out with me. Obviously pornography and just all of this, and all the while comparing myself to others. Like, well, I'm not so bad. Like other people are doing stuff far worse and far more extreme. But I'd never had like a real serious relationship with a girl that I cared about. So when I started dating my future wife, Carrie, 19 years old, there's a period of infatuation where, there was still like, there was lust and there was like, sexual thoughts, but it was like, I'm infatuated with her. So I passed those off as okay, because at least it's monogamous. Right. And yet, was not exercising self-discipline and self-control and that kind of thing. And so pretty quickly, once there was more opportunity on a practical level for me to seek things out and chase after things, I took those opportunities. I got into the car business in August of 2010. And not blaming anything. One thing about me and my story is, I'm going to take 100% ownership of every single choice I made. I don't blame anything on my addiction. I don't blame anything on my environment. Like I made my choices. But the car business is not the healthiest of environments. And I absolutely exploited that environment. I exploited the fact that I was good at connecting with people. Like I was a good salesman, not because I was such a slick salesman or because I was the smartest person when it came to car knowledge. It was because I was good at connecting with people and getting, clients to open up with me and build rapport. And I abused that. I absolutely was a predator. I was a predator. I was somebody who, again, chase after whatever I could get, whatever I could take from anybody in my path. And so porn became a maintenance drug. Like that was not what I was chasing. I wanted more. I wanted, the full on interactions with a woman in front of me. And so whether it was a sexual affair or inappropriate texting or anything in between, I would take whatever I could get, move on to the next person. And that was my MO.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I realized I started out of order, but I just, that when we were married and we're raising kids and I'm doing all this stuff, like as crazy as it sounds, you would have never thought it. And before I got married, I would have never thought that I would be doing these things just a couple short years later.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, that's quite a story. And of course, as the moms that are listening, we're all thinking about your wife and, what her experience was, what she was going through, what she knew, what she didn't know. And so with our time together, how do you feel like we can serve the moms the most? Because what I'm thinking of is surely in our audience, there are probably many women who are experiencing this, some sort of infidelity from their husbands, whether it is physical, emotional, pornography based, some type of infidelity. And so what would be kind of like step one? Like where would they start to try to address this with their husbands?
The first place I think to start with, and I love the fact that you emphasized it, you included in that list of infidelities porn, because porn is absolutely infidelity. And so like, I think the first place to start is do not buy into the lie that is a very common lie that porn's not cheating. Porn's not infidelity. It absolutely is. If I'm looking at porn, I'm sexually putting myself with that person or those people on that screen. So just emphasizing and affirming that, I think, is a really big key of this. So my wife, when I got into recovery eventually in 2016 and I got into recovery for one reason, to try and stop cheating on my wife. Like I wasn't getting into recovery to become a healthier person necessarily, or to work on myself or to have a relationship with Christ. It was like, let me just try and keep my marriage if I can. And God allowed me to work on my marriage and not cheat on my wife anymore. But he also brought tremendous healing in so many other areas. Carrie jumped into recovery herself for sexual betrayal, trauma, recovery, and healing. So that piece, I mean, the healing is available. Recovery is available. And a lot of folks, my wife included, myself included, had no idea that was available. That she didn't have to be forever this betrayed person, forever, this woman who was a victim and who was abused, and to stay as that person, that she had this healing journey that she jumped in with both feet and fully embraced. And she would tell you, not with the sole purpose of, okay, she's going to jump into recovery so that she can keep our marriage. Like she prayed and hoped that our marriage could be transformed, that our marriage could be healed, but she was willing to get into recovery to heal from the trauma, whether I got healthy or not, whether God gave us back our marriage or not. And that is such a key piece, is that, I mean, motivations can change. And like, at least from the guy's perspective, it's like, hey, if you're wanting to work on things, if you're wanting to come to groups and work on things, like you use the fuel that you've got. And so for me, my fuel was relatively shallow, or at least it was relatively, selfish. I'm here so my wife won't leave me. But the motivation can evolve and should evolve, right? But especially for her, she, Carrie would always coach up any of her women because she now leads groups for women, struggling with sexual betrayal trauma, is that, she shouldn't be there to save her marriage, shouldn't be there, just so that she and her husband can fix things. Like, we pray for that. We want that. We want to work towards that. But, be there to heal from her trauma, right? Be there to grow, be there to thrive as a mom, as a person, as a woman. And in a lot of cases, the marriages are restored. In a lot of cases, there is true redemption between the husband and the wife. But of course that takes two, right? So I can't control what my spouse does. She can't control what her spouse does.
Totally. And I do want to keep the focus 100% on you, but I can't help but share part of my story because it's so relevant to what you just said, which is my ex-husband. We are now divorced. Our marriage did not survive, but he did betray me. It was a physical and emotional betrayal with just one other woman. And we did do an affair recovery program. And I think what you said is so important about from the person who is being betrayed, that they should seek out some type of help, whether the partner or spouse is on board or not, just to heal themselves. And so that's how people often, when they ask me questions, how did I do what I did and blah, blah, how did I survive? How did I get through it? And I'm like, I started working on myself as soon as I found out what had happened or what was happening. And unfortunately, after 3 years of trying to save the marriage, it did end. And we do share 4 children. It was extremely devastating. But I did feel very much, I think the best word is healed, because I had been doing all that work and I had been part of a women's group, which there was one part of the group that was an anonymous. There was kind of some face-to-face contact on Zoom because it was kind of during COVID, but there was also this anonymous phone call. I would do a weekly support phone call, and just to hear other women's stories about what they were going through and to understand kind of like what we're talking about today. There was one woman who her husband was addicted to pornography. Another woman's husband was doing kind of inappropriate things in public with younger girls. That was a form of betrayal. And then my husband was doing kind of the traditional type of betrayal. And so I love what you said about it's important for all women to understand that there are multiple types, and to kind of understand what the type is that you're dealing with, and then B, to kind of get help for yourself. And then hopefully, your husband is on board and he wants to save the marriage. Doesn't always work out that way, unfortunately, but that is where it's almost like I want to backtrack now as far as like, how does this even happen? And so what I heard is like, you loved kind of like that feeling of getting the attention, or you kind of got addicted to the dopamine, and it started when you were younger. And it kind of first started with, being a child, even not even quite a teenager. Maybe I don't know if I quite understand the age, but starting with pornography. And so it's like, do you feel like the pornography is like a gateway to more serious types of betrayal?
It definitely is. And yet something that's kind of interesting about my story, at least, is my introduction to sexual addiction was pornography. My introduction to pornography wasn't even really pornography by any definition that you or I would read about. Mm-hmm. If you looked up pornography, this would not be included in the definition. It was looking at it once a year at Christmas time, the giant JCPenney catalog. Mm-hmm. And I found that in the middle, I can find, bikini and lingerie photos. So mm-hmm. I'm a little kid. I don't know how sex works. I don't know how masturbation works. I don't know any of this, but I knew that I liked the feeling that I got when I would look at these women. And I didn't even know the word objectification, but I was objectifying them. Right. Mm-hmm. And so I always share that, like, that was my introduction to pornography, not because it was necessarily pornography. It was my initial sexual objectification of pictures of women. Like, so in my opinion, that's a pretty good definition of porn, right? Is sexually objectifying pictures of a human. And so I was absolutely doing that, even though, you wouldn't classify that traditionally as pornography. And I didn't know what to do with myself, physically, and these feelings and stuff like that. But that was my gateway, which is kind of like there's this tricky dichotomy, because on one hand, there are gateways everywhere. I mean, especially nowadays, right? I mean, we could do a whole series on, all the gateways that are all around us with all the different screens that are everywhere and just all these things. And yet at the same time, so like we need to be careful. We need to be intentional as parents, right? But I also didn't necessarily need some glaringly obvious gateway. Like it wasn't like there was a stash of Playboys that I found,
Yeah.
or my buddy brought me into the woods and showed me this crazy poster. Like no, like none of that stuff happened.
Mm-hmm.
I still found a way to chase after sin, lust, dopamine, whatever. I mean, I still found a way to chase after that. So it's, and not to say that like I should be defeatist as a parent. Go, I guess I can't do anything, right? Like,
Yeah.
but I mean, my number one focus with my kids and my wife as well, she would say the same thing, is we just want to make sure that we constantly keep open lines of communication. We don't try to give our kids the talk. We try to have talks, right? And so that they can ask questions, they can talk about things, they can, I do my best to never ever make them feel bad about asking any question, or bringing up any topic. And so even with us, like they know at an appropriate level, they know our story. My oldest, who's 12, he knows more things than my 8-year-old when it comes to my story. But all 4 of my boys, they understand that their dad betrayed their mom. All 4 boys understand that when we go to recovery on Monday nights, we go to recovery. I mean, we go for ourselves still. It's kind of like physical therapy. Like we're not, triage in the ER, but it's still physical therapy. We're still working on things. Accountability is always going to be there. But, we go to recovery every Monday night to give back, right? To help other people that are dealing with betrayal, that are dealing with addiction. So I if nothing else, I can't keep them from struggling with stuff. I can't keep my kids from possibly entering, a cave of addiction, but I can at least stick a map in their back pocket so that they know that there's a way out, right? And that they can talk about it.
Yeah. So that made me think, okay, so, my kids are teenagers. I've got 2 boys, 2 girls. And it's like, I can't prevent them from seeing everything. I know they have seen things. In fact, we've talked about things that they've seen. I've tried to have those kind of continuous conversations. It's not just the one time and, one and done. Okay, boys, but it's just kind of an open dialogue. And so, I feel very confused even as a mom about, I know my boys are curious. They want to see what things look like visually. And so it's like, where do you, especially being a Christian man, draw that line? And I know your kids are a bit younger, but like, what is the standard, possibly that's the right question, that you would be setting with your, your oldest is 12, so totally in that territory. What do you say to them about what the standard is or what you expect of them?
What, again, I'm gonna emphasize, I like the way you finish that is kind of where I'll start. What I expect of them. Because, okay, I could very easily go down like this huge rabbit hole, and I'm going to try not to do this. So talking about sexual addiction, it would be very easy for us, even in this conversation right now, we could rail on the porn industry, right? We could rail on, how people over here do things and the way the media does this. And like, there's truth in all that, but there's not much I can do about the porn industry, right? There's not much that you and I can do about how the media treats stuff. And so the same thing with my boys. Number one, I don't teach my boys that when it comes to lust and sexual sin, sexual addiction, all that, pornography, the enemy is not a woman who might be attractive. The enemy is not a woman wearing a bikini. The enemy that's not the enemy. The enemy here, I mean, again, I'm a Christian, so I'm not here to preach to anyone, but I very much, I believe in my faith, right? So the enemy is Satan, the enemy is sin. Even on a physiological level, if somebody's an atheist, like the enemy is addiction, right? The enemy is, training myself in these destructive patterns. The enemy is not a woman that I might be tempted to objectify. That's my stuff. I got to work on that. Right. And so, when it comes to standards about like movies and TV shows, yeah, there's absolutely stuff that we don't watch. There's a lot of stuff I don't watch. It was like, nope, just it's not worth it. I think about it like every time. It's not that if I watch a movie that's got a sex scene in it that, oh, I'm gonna go look at porn right after the movie. It's just gonna be so tempting. I won't be able to deal with it. There was a time in my life where that might've been the case, right? I was there. I don't think that way now. Like I could deal with it, but why would I add that into my brain, right? Why would I add that image into my brain? It's like it's putting one more brick onto a wall that I don't need to be building. And so with our boys, like we absolutely talk about why we don't watch certain things. We have those conversations. It's not like, hey, don't look at that and don't ask me about why you shouldn't look at it. It's like, no, like, yeah, we're not going to watch this movie. And here's why, because I looked it up and, looks like there's this scene and this thing happens. And again, depending on the age, depending on the we have some conversations that are more detailed and some that are a little bit more shallow or vague. It depends on that kid and it depends on kind of, what I feel like the conversation we need to have. And I feel like I should put this giant asterisk. I mean, I feel pretty confident knowing how to help guys work through sexual addiction. If you're a 42-year-old dad and you're struggling and you're broken, I'm not coming on this podcast claiming to be an expert on parenting. Definitely not claiming to be an expert on, talking to kids about sex, but it is something that I'm extremely intentional about. But I recognize, like, my wife and we're trying to figure it out still. Every day is a new exercise in humility.
Right. Well, I actually really appreciate your kind of just authentic approach to it. Like you're just trying to do it. You're putting it out there. You're trying to have these good conversations. And sometimes that really is the highest level of parenting, just doing the best you can and kind of putting the effort and the intention and the care into what's happening because you truly care about what will happen to your children if they do to go down this path that could be destructive for them, and you want to guide them and nurture them and guide them into a positive relationship with their self and with a future partner. And so that's really important to start young. I believe that. And so getting back to this topic of keeping in mind that our audience is moms and this could be a potential struggle for some of them, what else could you offer as far as a message of hope? Because I think the one thing that stood out for me, what you said so far, and it also comes from my story, is that just because there is a betrayal of some sort does not mean that the marriage has to end. And I know a lot of people think that's the case. A lot of people think, immediately there should be a divorce. And I totally took the opposite approach. Like I said, I worked for 3 years. At the end of the day, it takes two people to want the marriage to work. And in my case, my spouse was not a willing participant to make that work. I was trying to put in the effort. And so what kind of message of hope could you give to the woman right now who is really in like the depths of discovering? I've heard the term D-Day, they call it Discovery Day when you first find out about this, and she's feeling that intense pain and betrayal.
Yeah. A couple different things I'll share. And please know, what I'm going to share here is straight from Carrie's mouth. It's straight from the mouth of women like her that have been through a lot of healing with sexual betrayals. This is not my speculation. At this point in time, at least, Carrie's she's not doing podcasts. But I mean, this is all stuff that's coming straight from her. So number one, circling back to what we've already talked about, but just I think it's worth emphasizing. It takes two to work on a marriage. But it only takes one to work on personal healing. It only takes one person to work on that growth. And that, that was something that for Carrie, that did give her a lot of hope because she felt like I was cheating on her because of her, because she wasn't pretty enough, or she needed to be a better wife. She needed to do all these things to try to help me not cheat on her or to try to fix me. And at the end of the day, it was totally not about her. Again, it was my own extreme issues with what I was chasing after. And so the things that she could work on, there was things that she could work on, but it wasn't working on so that I would stop doing something. In fact, one of the very first pivotal moments in our marriage, this was almost a year before I got sober, which was May 19th, 2016. But at the end of July 2015, I had another affair. This was the last sexual affair I had. Still struggled with pornography off and on after this, before I really truly started to get serious in 2016. But in July, I had this affair. Confessed. Every time I would confess, like I had another affair. I had another affair. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Never changed my behavior. And Carrie, in July of 2015, she said, "Okay, if you don't get some serious help, if you don't make some change, then you will lose me and the boys." So she gave me that ultimatum. And again, not that there was a switch that suddenly got flipped and then I became a healthy person the next day. It took a long time. It was not a linear journey. But I started to do things differently because I believed her. Like and I didn't want to lose her. So she, in that moment, she took ownership of what she can control. She can't say, "Logan, you're not allowed to cheat on me." Like, obviously that should have been obvious, but she couldn't control that, right? What she could control was, if you have another affair, then I am gone.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, she was just in the baby steps of learning how to respond to this stuff. I was maybe not even in the baby steps of learning how to be healthy. But that was a huge piece of just taking ownership of what she can work on. And then the other piece, and this is really, if you're somebody listening where, you've experienced betrayal or you are experiencing it, but, if you've got a husband or a partner that there is brokenness, like there is a desire to do things differently. Maybe they have no hope. Maybe they feel like they can't stop. They feel like there's no way they could ever change, but they do desire. So this is a very different camp than, the guy that's just out there doing what he wants and he's not wanting to change, right? He's not wanting to submit to healthy feedback. He's not willing to do a program, but if your husband does want to do things differently, he just doesn't have a clue how, then there are resources available. And of course, I don't know, there's going to be listeners all over, and I don't know what's available in your specific city or your specific area. But on one hand, there aren't nearly enough resources, I think, and yet they are available. Like, there are therapists specifically trained for sexual addiction. I didn't know that was a thing 9 years ago. There are therapists specifically trained for sexual betrayal trauma. I didn't know that was a thing 9 years ago. There are groups specifically for this. Now, groups are harder to find, especially an in-person group, is in terms of sexual addiction or sexual betrayal, but they are available. Like, I have a group specifically for men struggling with sexual addiction. Carrie leads a group for sexual betrayal trauma for women. These are harder to find, but if you are intentional to seek out resources and find relatively healthy people who are safe to talk to, who you can open up, to me, that's where it starts. I can either wait for the perfect group or the perfect resource, or I can start intentionally seeking out resources. And it might take a little while, right? I went to multiple groups before I found Prodigals, which was the group that I ended up actually finding my healing in. These other groups weren't bad. They just, some of them were relatively shallow. But look for a group that is led by people that have the type of healing you want. They've been in the trenches, maybe not the exact same trenches you've been in, but ideally they've been in some similar trenches, right? And yet they've experienced some healing. Because one thing that Carrie and I both found early on, she's looking for her resources, I'm looking for mine, and we found like these groups online, and these are still relatively prevalent. But it's like, especially for the women, it's like she would tell you this. It was filled with basically a bunch of man-hating, resentful, hardened, bitter women. That's like, at best, it's like, all right, we're going to support each other in our war against men. At worst, it's like just they're in just like steeped in sorrow and nothing else. There's no healing. There's no hope. And then a lot of what I found initially, and again, this is very common. I love recovery, and yet a lot of recovery content is this sort of like, hey, having addiction sucks, but there's nothing you can do to control it. So just fight one more day. And it's like, is that really the message? No, like, there is hope. There is healing. I don't need to be this person forever. Like, yes, early on in my struggle, I did need to focus on just one more day, or sometimes just one more minute. Like, yeah. But there needs to be a different finish line than just sober one more day. There needs to be a finish line like, I want to be the type of person who doesn't even have the thought of doing this stuff when temptation arises. That's not to say I don't ever get tempted, but my infrastructure has been completely transformed. Our marriage has been completely transformed. The way that I deal with life has been transformed. That's hope. That's what I want. And that's what I saw in 2016 when I met guys at this prodigals group, was people that were pretty healthy, genuine dudes that you would not have thought had done the type of things that I'd done and experienced healing. So I know that there was a lot of rambling there, but it's just knowing that healing is available, that resources are available.
Yeah, I think that all that was very, very helpful. And I specifically like the part about making a conscious decision about the group that you're in, that they're not stuck in the victimhood or the man hating hood or whatever it is, because that's not really healing. That's just kind of, it's empathy. It's, I feel sorry your husband did this and he sucks and he's right. But, and so that's why I actually made the conscious decision to leave my group, because I felt I had kind of made it past that, and I didn't want to stay stuck, and I was ready to create my new identity as a healed person. And I do have to give a shout out to the group that I was part of, because I know they are virtual and they are international. It was called Affair Recovery. It just so happens that it is located in Austin, Texas, where I live, but it is virtual. They have all different options for it. But one of the courses that I took there was called Hope for Healing. And so as you were talking, you actually said the words hope and healing at the same time. I'm like, oh, well, there's a reason why, right? Because there is hope in healing, that it can happen. And part of it is having, as the betrayed spouse, a new identity as, not being stuck in the victimhood. And then the person who is responsible for the betrayal, that or and many times it is a woman also. Some of the groups it was co-ed. And so we, didn't actually meet those couples, but I know they were there. It could also be the woman that they have a future to them, that they aren't branded with this, with scarlet letter on their chest for the rest of their life, and they're going out in public and they're always known as the cheater, right? They can recover, they can become a new, improved, better version of themselves and save the marriage if that, God willing, is going to happen. Okay, so to just recap, just to kind of finish up, I want to make sure we didn't leave anything out, because we did talk about, as a parent, talking to your kids about this, kind of preventing, talking about the porn, talking about the different types. Is there any other kind of message that we should give to make sure we touched on everything? Is there anything you feel like we left out?
Yeah, a couple things that I think always should be emphasized. I just want, even if 95% of your audience is like, yeah, I don't, this doesn't apply to me, or I've never heard that advice, I just want to make sure that this is stated, because this is still far too common. And especially if somebody is part of a church body, this tends to be more common within the Christian community. If you're a woman who is experiencing betrayal, whether that's pornography, full-on sexual affairs, anywhere on the spectrum, and you go to your pastor, you go to your prayer group, you go to a counselor, very common advice is make sure you're more open sexually, make sure you're more available, make sure you're willing to do XYZ. And it's all on these lines of again, what can you do to prevent your husband from stepping out on you? What can you do to make yourself sexier? So in other words, it's, without saying it, it's giving this message of, oh, gee, I'm sorry that happened to you. Well, what did you do wrong? And what can you do to fix that?
Yeah.
And this isn't me just saying only focus on what you can control. And so that, I mean, that certainly is true. Yeah, you can't control what your husband's doing, but that is also, that is so damaging. I would say abusive advice to tell a woman, not only because, yeah, it's not going to fix her husband. It's not going to fix the problem, because the problem's not about her. It's also asking her or telling her to sign up for more sexual abuse, because she has become part of this game. She has become part of this web of chasing after. And so just jump back in. And that's not to say, again, I'll try to keep it short here, but I mean, when I was in my program, when I was still learning, how to just the baby steps of how to be a healthy person, my wife and I still were intimate. We still had that part of our life. In some cases, depending, it's a case by case thing, but in some marriages, we do recommend that they do take a break for a while and have this kind of scorched earth where like basically everything gets reset. And there's a lot of wisdom in that. But if, again, this is especially if the guy has no desire to change, no willingness to do anything differently, to tell the wife to just jump into that is not going to help him, and it's extremely destructive to her. So I feel like that needs to be said.
Yeah, I'm actually so happy you brought that up, because you did kind of mention something like that earlier. And I wanted to jump on that nugget of information, because I think that's really important, that this is an issue within the self of the person doing the betrayal. Like
Right.
it is an internal issue. And I know personally, I kind of went through all those emotions, like I'm not good enough, I'm not sexy enough, I'm not whatever enough. Like, but then you get trapped in this, well, then what is enough? And then you kind of doing this chasing game, and am I enough? And that is a terrible place. That is a terrible place to live. I mean, that is part of why I do what I do, which is to help build confidence in women and teenagers, because I want people to know that they are good enough as they are. They're worthy enough as they are, that God made them to be who they are, and that they are enough. And sometimes it just takes that other person to do the work on themselves to, do that healing within themselves, and so that they can have a more honest relationship with each other. That was one thing that I also learned was, when couples do survive this together in a healthy way, just like you have, that a lot of times the relationship improves so much that suddenly, finally, they're having a really intimate relationship with one another, and the communication is completely much more open. Have you experienced like a transformation in such a positive way like that?
It is so night and day. And it's something that, I mean, it's honestly, it's part of a list of things that I'm just like, I thank God every day for salvation, for recovery. Because I mean, my life has been completely transformed, completely flipped upside down in the best of ways. That includes my marriage, my friendship with Carrie, my relationship with my boys, like everything. Just because, again, for years, I lived in the self-hatred and this despair of like, God, why did you create me? Why did you put me on this earth when all I do is hurt people? All I do is hurt Carrie. All I do is just hurt everyone around me. So because of the darkness of my past, I mean, it magnifies the light that is our life now, and our friendship, our relationship. There's this an uninhibited openness to our friendship, to our relationship, that where we can just talk about whatever, because there's no secrets, there's no shame. Um, and just like recovery, just like addiction, it's so much more than just the sexual part, right? It's like, and I love that, because in the darkness, what I was doing sexually was just the tip of the iceberg. And then in the beauty of our life now, like, yeah, our intimacy and our sexual relationship and all that, like, yeah, that's totally transformed. Our marriage is totally transformed, but it's transformed every single piece of our life. Because
Yeah.
what recovery has done for both of us, again, speaking for myself, but also, that Carrie would tell you this, and I've heard her say it, like what recovery has done is well, I'll speak for myself on this one. I mean, it stripped away my ego. It stripped away my selfishness, the way that I dealt with life. I always think of it like this exoskeleton that I built up over years. And so what recovery did was just like shred all of that away, and then rebuilt a new infrastructure, a new way of dealing with life. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect and that I don't struggle, but it definitely makes things a lot easier. Just recognizing, okay, what are the things that I can control here? What are the things that I need to work on here? What are my areas of weakness here? Having healthy boundaries, having healthy correctives, having to, for years in the program, for two years, I was in voluntary house arrest, basically. Having to completely submit my decision-making to external processes, and having to listen to other people for advice and feedback and tough questions. It instilled so much muscle memory that it doesn't mean that I can't make good decisions on my own. In fact, it's quite the opposite. What it's helped me do is and again, I'm not saying I do this perfectly, but what it's helped me do is to, before I make a choice, before I do something, I'm automatically, instinctively thinking through, like, well, what kind of feedback would I be getting on this? What kind of questions would I be getting on this? And in a lot of cases, I still ask for that feedback. I still invite people to ask me questions. I'm in a text thread every day with 2 other mentors that we're just constantly putting stuff out there. And it's usually not about addiction. It's usually not about sexual temptation, although it can be. It's life stressors, right? It's, oh, I got in an argument with my wife, or I'm struggling with frustration towards my kids, or, oh, I'm mad at this guy at work, or whatever. It's just life stressors, and just putting my stuff out there, owning it, working on it, and getting feedback on it. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and building those coping skills is so important because, with other types of addiction, whether it's drugs or alcohol, that's what people are dealing with, stress, and they're trying to avoid that discomfort, and so that's why they resort to those things. And then I kind of like what you keep saying, the word muscle memory, because to me, I have a neuroscience background, and so it's just making me think of that fire and wire. Our brains have that neuroplasticity, and so
Yes.
when you stop a behavior and then you start a new one, your brain can form to that new behavior. And so maybe, okay, wait, I do have one last question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure.
Oftentimes when we stop I also have a health background, and so when we stop a negative behavior, say like smoking, we have to replace it with something positive and healthier. And so what are the things that you advise people to replace the negative behaviors with?
Okay, so you probably have to edit this out a little bit, because I'm just thinking through how to best answer, because the temptation here is to be like, well, I don't know, because it depends on that person, and there is a lot of truth to that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can definitely speak for myself and examples, folks that I've worked with.
Well, that's okay. If this one is too broad, we can skip this one if you want.
No, I mean, I'll give you kind of a short and sweet answer, and if you want to expand on or clarify anything because I think it'll be relevant to it. So starting off, speaking for myself, exercise, healthier nutrition has been huge, and I'm not going to pretend that it was like, well, the day I got sober, I started, eating lettuce, and it was, but what recovery did, again, touched every area of my life, like, turn on the light in a dark room, was I every day, in a lot of cases, multiple times every day, I'm training myself to think differently. I'm training myself to think long-term instead of right now, selflessly instead of selfishly. And so that affected how much water I drank. That affected the type of food that I'm eating. That affected me exercising and what that looked like, because I'm training myself to think about holistic health and long-term benefits instead of what I want right now. Because what I want right now might be an Oreo and a bucket of ice cream and a pizza. And I'm not saying I don't ever eat, those foods, but I not nearly as much as I used to.
Yeah.
And I do have, exercise regimens that I never had before, because I want to be truly healthy. And it started with sexual addiction, right? It started with not cheating on my wife, but it's touched all these other areas, just like, how can I be healthier? And for other folks, so exercise is I think going to be a huge piece of it for almost anyone in recovery. And another thing that definitely is going to, it's not maybe a 1-for-1 replacement, but when I am stressed, opening up to my wife as well as Recovery Brothers about that stressor, about those frustrations, about those things I'm dealing with. Because that was typically, and this is definitely true of me, but it's largely true of most folks that come from addiction. Typically, when I'm stressed and frustrated, I'm probably not going to be opening up in a healthy way to people that love me and care about me. Like that's probably not a big part of my MO in the past. Mm-hmm. So that's absolutely something that's been a replacement. Is instead, I get frustrated, I get stressed. Okay, I'm going to open up to my wife. I mean, just literally 2 days ago, we had something where I shared with her. I said, maybe it wasn't a full on argument, but there was some tension there. And I just shared, I said, when you said this, and she had said nothing wrong, but she said something that in me sparked a little bit of shame, sparked some feelings of being less than. And I just, said, what it made me think of was, XYZ, and that kind of made me think of this. And so I really started to struggle in this other area. And me sharing that with her, I didn't fix the problem, but it was the start of fixing the problem, right? Because it was building that awareness. And also, she's my teammate. She's my ride or die. Like, why would I not open up to her about that? She cares about me. She loves me. Mm-hmm. Not asking her to fix it for me, but she loves me. Why would I not share this issue with her? Same thing with Recovery Brothers. Just like I mentioned that text thread, and still going to regular meetings, not as a crutch, but it's a weapon. It's a weapon that in the best of ways is like when I can surround myself with wise counsel and people who love me, people who care about me, who know me, who know my past, who know my struggles. Again, same thing for Carrie. She surrounds herself with people who know her. Like, why would we not ask those people for feedback? Why would we not ask their counsel and give them an invitation to poke and prod our decision making a little bit? Like, yeah, sometimes it might get annoying. It might hurt our feelings. That's okay. Yeah. But it's to help us make healthier decisions.
Yeah. I love that. So kind of doing things physically, kind of getting that stress out through physical activity, but then also those new habits of opening up, sharing your stressors with either your wife or your group, your mentors, or your text thread of your buddies who support each other. So this has been wonderful. Thank you so much, Logan. And I know you have an amazing Instagram account that you help and advise other people who are dealing with this addiction and recovery process. So what is your Instagram handle?
Yeah. So it's No Longer in Bondage. There's periods in between each word, No Longer in Bondage. Of course, my name is Logan Hufford. And it is something where I put the content out there. I made the Instagram with the idea of I want to reach men that are struggling, right? I want to reach a man that feels hopeless, that feels like there's no way out. But a lot of what I put out there, a lot of the feedback I've gotten is from similar maybe to some of your audience is women who have been affected by this, who have shared that it's helpful to understand. It's helpful to understand whether they're going through it right now, they've gone through it in the past, with that sexual betrayal trauma. So I would absolutely encourage, whether you're on either side of the coin, check that out. I think it'll be really beneficial and insightful. What you're not going to find is, me sipping a coffee with a trendy Bible verse, over top of it. I'm getting to the meat of, okay, here's this topic. Here's this part of my addiction. Here's this part of recovery. Here's this practical tool. So I really, really try to get some insightful stuff, tangible, practical stuff, put it out there. And also, if you just, maybe you're not personally affected by sexual addiction. If you have an unhealthy part of your life that you struggle to get traction in, most of what I talk about is going to be applicable for you too. Because at the end of the day, you touched on it, neuroplasticity. That's what we're talking about, right? Is rewiring my brain, relearning how to do things in a healthy way, and building those healthy neural pathways instead of the old ones. So yeah, it could be a different addiction. It could be somebody struggling with procrastination. Like, in some ways though, I'm blessed. And I say this in all sincerity, I am blessed that my past was as dark as it was, because the stakes were so high that when hope was presented to me, it was pretty obvious. Like, if I don't take this, what kind of a fool would I be? Because I knew I'm about to lose everything. I should have already lost everything. I'm thankful that I didn't have a lesser problem. And that's my own unhealthy thinking probably. But because I knew I had to get help or else. So, something I'm always coaching folks on too is like, if you have something where it's a lesser problem, like, well, we can just extrapolate it out. If you don't get healthier in 10 years, then what's likely to be the case, right?
Right. Getting that leverage. So you have like the maximum leverage already that was forced upon you. And Okay, well, thank you, Logan. I really appreciate it. And your honesty and openness is really admirable. And I know you've done an amazing job in your own personal life, and sharing your message to help others is phenomenal. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you for listening to the Positively Healthy Mom podcast, because there's no manual for the hardest job in the world. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends.